I do not hate Starfield. Starfield is a fun game to play. It's got a lot of fun quests, it's got a lot of fun adventures. I'm enjoying the story, I'm enjoying all of that. Is it as captivating as other Bethesda games? No. And this is what we're going to touch on in this video as to one of the reasons why it's not as captivating as it should be. But is it still a good game? Yeah, I think it is. I don't think it's like the best game ever, but it's also not like the worst game ever. And as you know, the internet being the internet, everyone seems to have an opinion that it's either the best thing to ever be experienced or literally the worst thing imaginable. It is not a bad video game. When it comes to Starfield, there's a big problem with this game, and I'm going to touch on this by talking about crafting first. And more specifically, the relationship between crafting and exploration, which in my opinion, the latter is one of Starfield's biggest failures. Not only is crafting reliant on you exploring and getting resources, I mean, sure, you could buy a lot of resources, but there's still going to be rare components that you have to search for at the end of the day to go find stuff, right? Starfield doesn't really give you a lot of actual incentives outside of gameplay progression to explore. Now, this is a big problem because it can make a game feel very tedious, right? It can make a game feel like you're not really going anywhere if all you're doing is going from location to location, ping-ponging from planet to planet, system for system, just looking for like a shotgun upgrade or just looking for like a new headpiece. It does not feel great to play that way. So what crafting does is it offers an alternate avenue of progression via exploration. Maybe you need to collect or smelt like 15 bronze ingots to create a new chest piece, right? That's like really cool. Well, to do that, you have to go to a bunch of different places to find the materials necessary for that. In Starfield, however, crafting is, and this is just my experience, completely and utterly useless. It's not cool to interact with. You know my feelings about the UI and how obtuse that is. It is not great. And because of that, this completely eliminates an avenue for exploration in this video game, because it seems to constrict you to one avenue that's efficient. You could interact with the resources and the crafting mechanics in this game, but why would you when you can just collect a better upgrade 5 seconds later from an enemy from just going to one planet? Is it completely worthless in the sense that it doesn't have any uses? No. But what it is that it's inefficient. What this does is, again, as I just mentioned, it restricts you down one playstyle. Now, what is that one playstyle of Starfield? You get on your ship, you go to the cockpit, you select your destination, you then jump up in the air, do your grav drive, right? And then you go to that planet, land on that planet, exit your ship, and then clear out whatever dungeon or mini dungeon. Can you encounter interesting things along the way, like ship encounters? I mean, I found a grandma one time. That was pretty fun. Yeah, you can, but most of the time what you're going to be doing is going from planet to planet in this progression and just collecting gear and then selling it. And it's not very fun. It's more fun when there's like a mission actually tied to it, but even then, not so much more that it actually makes the prefab locations on these planets interesting. There is a further issue with crafting that I need to discuss before we move on. This issue is that there is no longer an infinite amount of storage space for your character to have. For the most part, there's not an efficient or realistic method of infinitely storing your stuff without like glitching or something. You have a limited finite amount of storage space in this game, which sucks because in Bethesda games, generally you would have to passively acquire resources and then just store them in your outpost or in like your chest in your house or whatever. Unfortunately, you can't do that in Starfield really, so what you're left with is a bunch of resource and inventory management, deciding what's important, and this can be especially hard if you don't actually know what is important, and it's especially hard because crafting in Starfield, as I said, is not really useful, so it just makes it seem like you're wasting a bunch of time interacting with a system that's not going to be as efficient or beneficial if you just would have killed enemies instead, because it's just much more efficient to just go to a different planet, kill all the enemies there, pick up whatever equipment you find useful or you can sell for valuable stuff, and then just leaving. It's a big problem with this game where it doesn't encourage you to interact with the other systems that actually are in it, and those systems haven't been really fleshed out to the degree that they have in previous Bethesda games. In previous Bethesda games, you needed to explore to upgrade your character. You had to acquire the resources in Skyrim for alchemy, for blacksmithing and Fallout 4. You needed to get adhesive and like screws to upgrade your weapons. You needed this because it was essential to the gameplay. However, when it comes to Starfield, because these systems of crafting, and honestly because the gameplay itself is very easy, you don't really need to actually explore any of the worlds you go to. You can just go to the pre-marked locations on your map, and then leave. And this is where we get to Starfield's biggest problem with exploration, which is that it has nowhere interesting to explore in a weird way, because it's space, right? And this game really wants you to explore. I mean, the first faction you meet in this game is the exploration faction in everything but name, and even then, its name is Constellation. I mean, Bethesda is not being subtle for what they want out of this game. All of the planets and buildings and enemies are all the same. It's literally the same buildings on the literal same planets. It has the literal same enemies. I mean, there's no uniqueness or interesting quality here. You know what made something like Skyrim or Fallout 4 great was its diversity of experiences. What you could do in Skyrim is you could go anywhere and see anything, and your playthrough would be entirely different from anyone else because there was so much unique and cool things to see. Starfield really lacks the interesting locations that made these experiences in Fallout 4 and Skyrim memorable. Because in Fallout 4, I remember the first time I saw the castle for the first time. I remember in Skyrim the first time that I saw Whiterun or Bleak Falls Barrow. I remember the first time I saw the aircraft carrier in Fallout 3. I remember these things not only because they were just interesting to me at the time, but also because that they felt like they were part of a bigger, living and breathing world that Bethesda used to try to create. However, when it comes to Starfield's locations, they feel like they're just there to exist, for you to progress through. And I know some of you at this point are being like, well, you know, there's actually this thing, but that doesn't matter at the end of the day, because a game, regardless of what its intentions are, should feel like this world to be lived in. It should feel like an adventure, like a living, breathing thing. And unfortunately, Starfield, it just doesn't feel like that. Its locations feel like airports and not like fleshed out things that exist to become a part of a bigger world. They exist to facilitate progression and to give you upgrades and to give you quests. And that's not interesting, it's not fun, and it doesn't work. There's nothing interesting in space either. Like, you spend half your time in space in a loading screen and the other half fighting like ship pirates and like maybe collecting minerals. There's nothing interesting or cool to see. There's like 1,000 planets. So there's 1,000 planets, but yet none of them actually have anything of substance. Sure, they could have like a town on it, but most planets are either completely barren, not actual planets like asteroids, or they just have like one outpost on them with like some Faerun zealots or like some ecliptic mercs and maybe some spacers. Wow, so different. It lacks the interesting landmarks and experiences that Skyrim and Fallout 4 have. You're not going to be invested in the actual world, for one thing, but you're also just not going to be really incentivized to go off the beaten path like you were in Fallout 4 and Skyrim, because there's nothing there to find. It's the same buildings, the same locations, the same things. What I loved about Bethesda games was that you could craft your own adventure from them. You could become a completely different person playthrough for playthrough. And Starfield, at the end of the day, it just feels like you're doing the same things over and over again, because everywhere and everything looks the same or literally is the same. And this problem of exploration is exacerbated further because while the systems may not encourage you to do that or not really work or are fleshed out to facilitate exploration, and there's not a lot of interesting things to see, that would be one thing. There's another problem because it's just not practical to explore in Starfield, which is weird. Because in Fallout 4, in Skyrim, in other Bethesda games, if you wanted to go to a new and interesting location, you could just walk there. There was no interruption to your gameplay. You could, if you wanted to, go from point A to point B in 5 minutes without opening a menu, without seeing a loading screen, without interacting with really anything at all. And it was great because it allowed you to take in the world. It allowed you to find new things or maybe get distracted by a bunch of other stuff. It allowed for a living, breathing environment. However, in Starfield, that's not the case. It's not practical to land on a planet and then walk for like 20 minutes to a location just to get a little box check mark that said you explored this planet. It's not practical to go from loading screen to loading screen just to get from one planet to another. It's a nightmare and creates this environment where it actively seems to discourage you from exploring space. In a weird enough way, Bethesda has created a game in which exploring space feels boring. You know, when you hear about space and like the news or like YouTube on Reddit or whatever, there's always this mystery about what's out there and the intrigue and the infinite possibilities, right? Even the naive hope that one day that we'll all be able to explore the stars. That just isn't there in Starfield. Starfield feels like a game in which we are unnecessarily exploring things that have already been explored. It's like, not that we're after Columbus, but that we are after the United States, if that makes any sense. We have already explored everything. There is no corner of the world left untouched. That's what Starfield feels like. If Bethesda wanted this exploration to feel unique, first off, we don't need 1,000 planets for that, but more than that, you could have condensed these planets and created interesting environments that are so foreign that they're incomprehensible. You could have used the resources at hand to, sure, have some barren planets here or there, but to make a wide array of different resources and environments. I mean, there are planets in our universe that rain diamonds. There are planets made of completely water. There are planets with crystalline forest or whatever. Sure, most planets in our universe are boring, barren wastelands, but that doesn't mean that every single one of them has to be. Bethesda had a real opportunity here to create condensed, interesting worlds packed full of interesting things and people to meet, and instead, we have a bunch of shit spread out across a wide open array, a wide map that just results in a very boring and bland experience. What made Fallout 4, Skyrim, and other Bethesda games great were their worlds. They were massive, yet they were also condensed. They were focused, well-crafted things that had a cohesive vision of what they wanted to be. More than that, these games were well-defined and had a dense amount of content that related to the wider aesthetic and themes of the game's worlds. Nothinger, Boston, The Reach, The Pit, Bravo, The Pale, Vardenfell. You know what those locations are, what they look like, what they're about, what's in them. You know all their little quirks. They are unique, and you can define them and explore them to your heart's content, and now, today, you could put those fuckers on a map. Bethesda made games in which their worlds felt alive, even in spite of their jankiness and clunk. They felt like living, breathing places worthy of adventure. Does Starfield have interesting locations to explore? Yeah, it does in some places. The cities, especially. My favorite place so far has been Neon. Those locations are so too few and spread out amongst a bunch of boring, uninteresting slop. Starfield is a good game. Despite what I've said here, I do believe it is a fun game to play. I mean, I just recently beat the Ryujin Industry storyline, and that was really fun. It was a complete departure from what Starfield's normal gameplay was, and it wasn't just like a Thieves Guild 2 or whatever. It was fun, and it was interesting. And the visuals in this game are incredible. While these planets can be boring, while they can be barren, finding that one planet, that one singular planet that just vibes with your aesthetic, that just vibes with what you're looking for, and getting on a high point and looking over the universe and the world that Bethesda has created and taking in the visuals, it's stunning. It's very stunning and beautiful, and it sometimes makes the exploration worth it. Sometimes. You ever visited a national park? And I don't mean like the Grand Canyon, I mean like a national park that's out of the way, right? One that isn't really on any maps, that is just sort of there. I visited one a couple years ago that I sort of have a personal connection to. My dad actually helped clear out the paths for that national park. You know, chopping down trees and uprooting plants and flinging snakes away from him so they wouldn't bite him. You know, all the hubbub, right? All that sort of stuff. I visited there a couple years ago, and, you know, it took us a bit to get there, but we were there for about 45 minutes, and it did have a great, stunning view of the valley and what existed in it, and it was an interesting place. But at the end of the day, there wasn't much for us to do there, so we just got back in our car and headed back to our own little corner of normalcy. That is what the problem with Starfield's exploration is at the end of the day. Sure, it can be this visually beautiful experience that can leave you stunned by its vistas and its landscapes, but at the end of the day, the gameplay and the overall locations and universe that Starfield exists within lacks the qualities and experiences that other Bethesda games have that formed meaningful, long-lasting worlds. It just doesn't have the quality of a good game world. It is not interesting, and going off the beaten path and exploring feels more like a chore than this exciting adventure for the mysterious, chaotic unknown. And frankly, it is at times just boring and tedious to play through. The universe of Starfield is big, and it can be visually stunning, but it is empty and devoid of the things that made games like Skyrim and Fallout 4 worth revisiting time and time again. Thanks for watching. I've been Sherpal. Hope to see you next time.